My name is Alex Mayer. I'm the newly elected MP for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard. It is an entirely landlocked constituency, but I still think they're going to let me chair this meeting for you today. So we are got a panel of speakers and we have a sponsor for the event. Our sponsor is OFFSHORE4SURE and are represented today by Fiona Gilmore, who will address us briefly in a few moments. And also on the panel we have got Dan Norris, who is Mayor of the West of England and MP for North East Somerset and Hanham, and beat Jacob Rees-Mogg, hooray! I just realised I've set myself up because I don't know who everyone else beats, but you know.
I can't remember who I beat. So long ago.
We have got Barry Gardiner, the MP for Brent West. Next we've got Matthew Patrick, the MP for Wirral West. And we have got Jenny Riddell-Carpenter, the MP for Suffolk Coastal. Hooray! So we will kick off, first of all, with Fiona, please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks to SME4Labour for brilliant organisation. I'm going to be very quick headlines, and hopefully the right questions are asked to be able to amplify some of the points I want to make. Today we're launching our charter, which is the Great British Offshore Grid for speedier, faster and cheaper energy. The Secretary of State's speech was incredibly exciting and uplifting for us to hear. We agree with absolutely everything he said. The missing bit of the jigsaw is that we need to have a strategy, a master plan. And 5 years ago, when we started working on this, looking as volunteers with engineers, economists, architects, and business people in the tourism sector, we asked the question, how can we do this faster and cheaper? And we went and talked to Belgium's Elia, and they said to us, well, first of all, you're looking at the wrong map. You need to change the picture that you're looking at. And they gave us this map. I'm going to hold it. They described the North Sea corridor as the main arterial corridor for taking offshore wind directly from offshore wind farms directly to brownfield sites closer to population demand. They said that Britain was, if you like, very outdated in its thinking with outdated plans, that it wasn't doing that. Why would you create offshore wind at sea and then bring it on land as quickly as possible? We took this map to a classroom of 6-year-old boys and girls, and we said, with a ruler, can you please draw a picture of how you take the wind energy from those pink triangles, which are the wind farms, to London. So we picked, for that purpose, these ones here. And they got out their rulers and they drew a straight line to London. What they didn't do is they didn't make a geographical deviation to Aldborough, a tourism resort, for a cup of tea before they went south. So with this in mind, we then started to talk to Professor Tim Green at Imperial College London, Professor Nick Butler, one of the outstanding preeminent energy economists in this country, and we said, how do we do this cheaper and quicker? And the idea is an offshore grid. You pull the energy at sea, it's cheaper, you save 6 billion, and it's much cheaper because you're not building 50% of the onshore infrastructure anymore. So I'm going to put this up, and when it comes to question time, I hope we can talk about this in more detail. This is a map, a chart, as a result of our research that shows all the benefits of going for an integrated onshore, offshore grid. It is one total thing. It's not two different things. It needs to be integrated. 6 billion saving. You get rid of a lot of these projects which become redundant, including some of these bootstrap projects costing 1.8 billion each. You minimise the loss of biodiversity, because aren't we shooting ourselves in the foot if in the race to net zero we destroy the very biodiversity on which this planet rests, and we save our tourism economy based on nature for the, if you like, the ramblers, the cyclists, the ornithologists, the people who come to these places in the first place. And we not only save money, but we have amazing economic growth opportunities for British manufacturers to manufacture superconducting cables that will take 10 gigawatts, not 2 gigawatts, of electricity from wind farms directly to brownfield sites. This is a huge economic opportunity for Britain. So I'm going to stop there because everyone's got something important to say. And then in the questions, hopefully, we can amplify some of these points. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fiona. So now we move to our first panel speaker, who is Barry Gardiner. Barry, please.
Alex, thanks very much. Not quite. Shall I? I'll try with that one, maybe. Okay. In 1840, we had the first postage stamp. In 1878, we had the first telephone company. In 1971, we had the first email, and in 1989, we had the World Wide Web. In just under 150 years, we've gone from point-to-point information sources where if you wanted to know something, you had to know who you wanted to ask and then ask them directly. And we went from that to a system where there was interconnectivity. In 1954, high voltage direct current power transmission allowed high volumes of power to be transported across large distances. In 1982, Europe's first wind farm was commissioned on a Greek island, onshore. In 1991, Europe's first offshore wind farm was commissioned in Denmark. It had 11 turbines and a total installed capacity of 5 megawatts. That's about enough to power a village of 800 homes, okay? Since then, offshore wind farms have been connected individually to shore via point-to-point connections, with little coordinated planning for future development. And subsea interconnectors have primarily been used to connect only 2 separate transmission systems. So it is remarkable that we're still basically using a point-to-point system. A more holistic approach is on the cards. Think of it as the beginning of the World Wide Web for electricity. It will result in the development of offshore hybrid projects which can connect multiple wind farms to multiple markets, combining offshore wind energy generation and transmission assets into one single multi-purpose asset. Now, what are the benefits of a meshed design? Lower carbon emissions, because all generation assets are being used more efficiently in their respective national energy systems. Landfall sites, fewer points where the power is brought ashore, and that reduces the environmental impact, the tourism impact that you were just speaking of. Asset costs. Mesh grids have fewer assets, but they are higher rated, okay? So there's a bit of arbitrage that's going to go on here, because cables and more offshore infrastructure are going to be at a higher quality and more expensive. But we think, best estimate is that the capital costs of those assets might be higher, but that would be offset by the wider system savings. Lower investment costs from cheaper connections and ultimately lower consumer prices, because grid integration and cross-border trading will lead to fewer bottlenecks in the system. And of course, finally, there's energy security. Now, there are challenges for offshore mesh grids. There are a number of technical, commercial, and most of all, policy challenges related to them, and we can perhaps get into those in the discussion because I've only got 3 minutes. Okay? What policy change is needed? Better harmonization of regulatory regimes, Harmonising renewable subsidies, that's really important, because if you don't harmonise the subsidies across the different countries that are going to benefit from the mesh grids, then your population wants to know why somebody else is benefiting from the subsidy that your taxpayers are paying. Okay, so that's actually really quite a tricky one. A way of equitably accounting for upfront investment costs between stakeholders in a way that takes into account the potential future benefits. And again, that's a tricky one, because you have to make an estimate of what those benefits are going to be in your system, your national system, as opposed to the cost of the whole. Support for development and innovation, well, we certainly need that, and coordinated community-wide transmission planning. And we, of course, also need the supply chain and the skill set to be able to deliver all of this. So in general, the development of offshore mesh grid solutions would require the cooperation of a range of stakeholders, including the network of European transmission system operators, and the UK and the EU governments and regulators and industry and community stakeholders. Now, the North Sea Energy Cooperation is a wonderful thing, but after Brexit we're no longer a part of it. I do believe that there has been an agreement that we will have some sort of understanding with them, but that is not fully developed. So, is it exciting? Yes, it is. Does it have great potential? Yes, it does. Are there huge problems with it that you didn't outline? Yes, there are, and that's what we need to have the discussion about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Barry. So our next speaker, please, is Matthew Patrick, who is the MP for Wirral West. So nice and close by, yeah?
Thank you, yeah. I mean, literally and in terms of the constituency, yeah, doing well. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Patrick, as you just heard, the new Member of Parliament for Wirral West. I'm not going to get sick of saying that anytime soon. Thank you. Thank you to SME4Labour for putting this event on and for inviting me. My interest isn't just that it was an 11 a.m. civilised time. I will step into some of my interests as well. My thanks also to Fiona and to Barry. They made really interesting remarks. It's an honour and a bit daunting to follow Barry, because I've sat in the chamber, I've seen him on TV before, right? When you sit in the chamber and you hear someone stand up, no notes like he does in the chamber, with great oratory and power, you know you're there with like a master of this. So Barry, I'm never going to try and follow you again in another panel. I'm from the Wirral, and my other interest here is I used to work at Ofgem, where part of my role, I thought I was walking into a bit more of a comms role, but it was quite policy heavy, and I was trying to work out how do you charge for the use of the transmission network and the balancing system. That was quite complex, it was quite interesting, but it started to take me into some of this area where I think we can have quite an interesting discussion today. As you know, because I said, I represent Wirral West. It's on the Wirral Peninsula, juts out into the Irish Sea. We have some wind farms just off some of our beaches, so I know this is an interesting area for my constituents. I am passionate about our environment, I'm passionate about renewable energy, and I think the development of offshore grids I think it's interesting, potential, can be a big win for coastal communities. I think it can reduce the need for onshore infrastructure, and I think there are many benefits that Barry set out. A politician once said to me, Matthew, everything's been said, but not everyone's said it yet. So I'm going to not do that. I'm not going to repeat the many kind of qualities and concerns that Barry set out, because I think we can give more time for a good discussion. What I will say is I think this is a good start to kind of explore these options, but it does need broader considerations. We've got to navigate this shift in how we generate, transport, consume and store energy. It's clear that fossil fuels cannot provide us with that long-term energy security and affordability and, crucially, the green energy we need. So my interest is, how do we come together? How do we build the right infrastructure that can get us the right energy mix with the good jobs, bringing us towards that ambitious target of net zero, creating those good jobs and doing it the lowest cost to consumers? So I'm hoping we can explore that on this panel as well today. And thank you for your time.
Thank you ever so much, Matthew.
I get that a lot. You know?
Sorry.
Patrick and Matthew. So
it's written like that.
Don't you worry, however it goes.
So our next speaker is Dan Norris, who is Mayor of the West of England and MP for North East Somerset and Hanover.
Thank you, well, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. First of all, can I start by saying it was great to get Moxit done, and I'm sure you agree with that. I feel it was public service, actually, but there you are. Look, as a mayor, I think one of the things I've learnt over the last 3.5 years is that any policy that you are hoping to achieve is only going to be successful if you get buy-in from the public. And that's why I think offshore mesh has a great potential, because I know the sensibilities of the people that I represent, about 1 million people at the moment, as well as my constituents as an MP. And I know that they genuinely believe there's a climate emergency, the vast majority of them. They really are keen to do something about it. But then a sort of schizophrenia comes in when it comes to how you actually do it and how it might impact on them, or the other things that they, as you rightly pointed out, the other things like nature and wildlife and things. So I'm quite excited about what you're talking about, because I dare say there are probably all sorts of challenges. But what I know is that getting round what the people want and how they can best embrace the things that need to happen to deal with the climate emergency. And let's be clear, I believe there is a climate emergency. I think we've got to start from that point. I think that, you know, we needed to be doing things yesterday, frankly, but we're going to have to start as quickly as we can in many other ways. And I think anything that allows the public to have buy-in so that they can embrace what the change needs to be is a very, very good idea. So look, like Matthew said, I'm not going to talk anymore, because luckily we are talking to relatively Leighton, and others have done a good job in describing the challenge, and I think the questions are the bit that are now quite interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And now finally over to Jenny, the MP for Suffolk Coastal.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm not intending to do a keynote speech. This is just more convenient than leaning in over that. Before I begin, I should declare interest. Aldborough, the scheme that Fiona mentioned at the beginning, is in my constituency. And so not the proud Labour MP to have ousted a long line of Conservative MPs and be the first ever Labour MP representing it. I've also got some of the most beautiful towns forming my constituency. Which I'm reminded of daily as I drive, the long drive that takes an hour and a half to drive the length of my constituency. So this has been a big issue in my local area, as you can imagine, and obviously the issues are loudest where they're most of effect. And there's a few things that I want to say, and they touch on the themes that have already been explored so far. I have no doubt that this government will be the greenest government that we've ever seen, and our commitment is absolutely right to drive forward net zero at pace and at scale. And I have no doubt that in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years, throughout all those milestones, and when we look back on our achievements in 15 years and beyond, the decisions that we're making now will drive forward significant consequences, and significant impact and the impact of these aren't inconsequential, they're significant, and we will be proud of them once we see the impact of those being driven forward. And it's a Labour government that historically has made changes like this, whether it be post-war the NHS, whether it be driving forward the rail revolution, whether it be the post-war House Building Act. The significant investments that we make always come at a time when they're most needed. And I have no doubt that the changes that we're making as a nation now, and the investment in GB energy, the investment in our infrastructure, onshore, offshore, is all a part of that will show the significance of it. There is a but, I think, and I'm really keen to explore this, and you just touched on it, Dan. I think we need to ask ourselves as a nation a few big questions here. And one of those, which we haven't yet asked, is, do we see offshore being part of our future? Do we see the offshore grid where we take ourselves? We know that many countries throughout the EU are already doing it. Fiona touched on it earlier. If we join the race now, we won't be leading the race for offshore, we'll be behind it, but we'll be part of something that is revolutionary and is changing the energy infrastructure across the world. And do we want our future to be offshore grid? And if the answer to that is yes, then we need to make sure we're aligned to that. It's not something that's been taken seriously enough to date. If we see ourselves being an offshore grid, based country, then let's start to invest in that now. Let's make sure we're looking at it diligently, and let's make sure we're making the right decisions now for that future. If the answer to that question is no, then we need to have different conversations about community engagement, about taking our communities with us, and making sure that the decisions that we make, the strategies that we deliver, the plans that we build are totally valid and right for the areas that represent. We've got some challenges in our community where it's very hard to stand there and explain to people that the challenges of building onshore grid, the benefits won't be felt locally. The energy that's being brought in will power up London and the South East, as Fiona talked about. And we have those real challenges, and as leaders of our communities, we're able to have those conversations head on, but we need to be empowered to make sure that we can demonstrate that a lot of these decisions are going to benefit the local community and that they understand and have buy-in to that. And at the moment, I don't feel that that we're yet there and able to have those conversations locally. And if we're going to rule out offshore, then we need to be more committed to making sure that we can take communities with us locally. And we've just seen today more announcements around the brownfield passport for housing, which is a brilliant concept, that if you build on development on land for housing and for wider investment on onshore for communities, that it will be a passport for development. And it allows us to circumnavigate and get around the issue of grid building on the green belt. And those very sensible conversations, those very sensible policy conversations, are something that we need to adopt and need to have more thoroughly for energy infrastructure. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot more and touch on some of those broader themes. But thank you very much, and I look forward to some of the questions that are coming.
As you can hear, the panel are very keen to hear from you. So we will now move straight over to questions and take them in threes. We have a microphone. Do we have someone who's... We do. Excellent. So woman over there to start with.
Thank you. I'll introduce myself. I'm Mel Dawkins. I'm Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Environment at Canterbury City Council, and also sit on KCC, Kent County Council. So sort of great interest. I speak to officers often. My question, I've got quite a few because I'm a bit confused.
No, you only get one, I'm afraid.
Oh, sorry, I put it all in one thing. And a bit confused. One, what does this all look like? Officers tell me they don't really know what's happening, you know, because there's lots. Has this been adopted by the administration yet, or is this still just a petition? And is this something that we want to follow through? And if that's the case, I know local authorities have been tasked to set up renewables, find locations for renewables. How does that fit in with that? Is this all going to be part of a bigger project, or is this sort of a different one, and the local authorities get on with theirs? You know, I think they're just loads and loads of things that need to line up together, and they're not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. In the brown there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Harry. So my question is, so I think the offshore meshed grid idea sounds like a fantastic idea, but one thing that I wonder is the implications for security. I'm particularly thinking if, for example, Russia wanted to harm our energy supply, how do we make sure that this grid infrastructure would be defended against that and that we'd be resilient against it? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then gentleman at the front there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Norris, Councillor in Aberdeen. A couple of questions. I'm actually the shadow member for Net Zero. Our administration in Aberdeen is run by an SNP Liberal coalition. There's two things that struck me. Scotland's not on the map over there, and nor is Aberdeen, and we have a big vested interest in this. And how much GP Energy play into this? Thank you. Which is going to come to Aberdeen, we hope.
Great, thank you ever so much. Matthew, would you like to kick us off on those ones? Choose anything you want.
We just do through here. Is this working? Yep.
Yeah.
The one, conscious there's three, and all five of us could try and do all three. So what I might do is just go
choose your favourite
to Mel's because it was the first one. So thank you, Mel. And will we do this? I think was the essence of your question. But I think you also made a really good point, which is we've got to make sure if we're doing something like this, it has to be joined up. all of the work we do when it comes to our energy transition, we've got to make sure it's joined up, and that's from our infrastructure, touches on security concerns that other people raised. So in terms of are we going to do this, I think part of the conversation we're having today is to explore those benefits and those challenges so that when we go back to Parliament we can have those conversations with more expertise that you bring to us in the room, with more information as well. So on that, I guess it's for me, I think it's an interesting opportunity, but I think Barry very eloquently set out that with the opportunity also comes challenges, and so I don't think we can say we're going to go down one route. But I definitely think your point about making sure that we are joined up in any approach that we take is a really good one. And I think I'll finish on this part. I think we've got to recognise now, right across the country, in all walks of policy areas, the opportunity that we have. Because in many areas we have Labour councils and Labour Metro mayors with Labour MPs and a Labour government for the first time in a very long time. And that comes with it huge opportunities to make sure that we're scaling this and bringing people together. So that point I thought was an excellent one, and I think whatever route we do take, we need to make sure we're doing it collectively.
Great, thank you. Jenny?
Brilliant. I'll tackle the security question if I can, and I'll stand up because I feel it's quite hard to lean up. I think it's a really good point, and it is something that is often raised, and it's something that will always need to be part of the discussion. I will say that it needs to be part of the discussion for any offshore energy creation, because where you're transmitting it onshore, all those risks are still valid. But absolutely, and I think one of the things I didn't say in my opening remarks, and I know that we all passionately believe this, is that the events of the last 3 years on cost of living, driven by the war in Ukraine and the activity of Russia, really heightens the need for energy security, and that's in all of its senses. So whether it's energy creation, but also energy protection, making sure that we don't put ourselves at unnecessary risk from interventions from Russia or other organisations.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Barry?
Yeah, energy security. Because there are increased options for sharing electricity between different countries, it should improve the reliability of our electricity supply. So in terms of security of supply, yes, but in terms of being a target, it's a much bigger and better target for anybody to attack. Because if you're looking point to point, then there's multiple small targets. Here, what you're looking at with an offshore mesh grid is something which, if you can interfere with it, is not just going to cut out one strand, it's going to affect multiple countries and their electricity supply. So there's pros and cons, it seems to me, on the security side. Security of supply, yes. Security against adverse actors, well, you are giving them a bigger target. The question is, how do you then ensure that there is what the petal on that flower says, and that is resilience, because you need to make sure it's resilient. Mel, in terms of, you asked, what does this look like? Well, in Jenny's world, it looks like that beautiful view over Orford Ness, because you don't have all the guff coming in and the infrastructure on the shoreline, right? I love Orford Ness. You're so lucky. I have to tell you, you really do have some of the best birding sites in your constituency. You've got Minsmere as well, don't you? Yeah, oh dear. The Welney Marshes?
But yeah, Felix are up to...
Gosh, she's so lucky. It's unbelievable.
You're all welcome.
Yeah, I know what it would be. Come and campaign, yes. So what it looks like is really important, and that's one of the driving forces behind this, because actually it doesn't look as obtrusive on the horizon, on the landscape, and that's a real plus. I suppose if you wanted to say what does it look like out there in the North Sea, well, it'll be underwater, but it will be a hub, and you come in at this point. There we go.
Yes, absolutely.
You raised some very good points earlier that were challenges for me on the regulatory side, and by the way, I agree entirely.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem for government.
It's
it
a
really
big
is.
one.
Yeah.
Hopefully it can be tackled like other big crises, so it's really grasped and taken as a mission. But coming to security, we have been speaking to some people who are specialists in security, because obviously it's a major issue. And at the moment, the current plan is for over 30% of the country's electricity to come through one single hub, which is, if you like, this Aldborough hub. And it doesn't make sense to have so much of the country's electricity concentrated in the easternmost point, geographically the closest place to Russia, to Putin. And what makes more sense is to have a grid where if one of them is actually taken out, a grid is so flexible and so resilient that it won't affect the others. And so that is something that needs to be considered and taken seriously, including the fact that the offshore platforms themselves can become defence bases in their own right, a bit like a Martello Tower was for Napoleon. We can have these incredible offshore platforms now that have all kinds of technology on them that act as a defence system in their own right. So I think security is something that definitely needs a serious discussion with other ministries. And the second thing that was asked was the Scotland question. Why is Scotland not on the map? Well, that was the fault of the CEO of Belgium, Elia, who gave me this map. Of course Scotland's on the map. Of course Aberdeen's incredibly important. And a lot of the technology that was used in Aberdeen for oil rig platform construction can be transferred immediately to offshore platforms. It's a similar type of build, so we can build these things for ourselves. And Scotland, with GBE, with its headquarters there, it's the catalyst for the public sector, private sector approach that is used by Elia and TenneT and Ørsted, and that hopefully will be a model for us to employ the same sort of system where the national electricity system operator should now be impartial, independent, and be doing thorough, independent studies looking at the cost-benefit analysis, taking into account the losses as well as the serious cost savings.
Fiona, can I just ask, you said about the security. You're our expert here, so are there equivalents, even if they're not fully meshed grids elsewhere in the world, where things like this have been done? To the question's point, there is a heightened risk by having everything in one space, but your point about you almost create a defensive base around that as well. Are there other countries where we can learn from on this?
I think that this is where the rapprochement with the rest of Europe is so important, because they're looking at this at the same time. And this is an area where collaboration and much closer partnerships, working together with these people, is going to really pay off.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Dan, anything to add?
Thank you very much. Well, to my comrade from Aberdeen, did you say an SNP Living Democrat coalition?
Yeah.
How awful. You have my deepest condolences.
Well, if we start at zero, we'd have to go down quite a lot.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I mean, what I'd say is, look, the internet was created for the very reason of security, so that if something was taken out, everything could be rerouted. So I can't believe that can't work in the same way with these kind of technologies. But I also think that what you've also got to recognise is there's going to be a whole lot of other changes that are happening, not least quantum computing, artificial intelligence, that's going to make this thing and other things work in a very different way to how they've done in the past. So I think we should take these things on with gutso and enthusiasm, because I think you can have the penny in the bun. I really think you can square a circle if you're devoted to it and focused to it. And what bigger price is there than the future of the planet? You know, if that doesn't motivate you to find a solution for this, I don't know what will.
Great. We can take another round of questions now. A woman in the far corner.
Hi, so this is a question about the financing. I'm Amy and I'm in SME financing in this. So it doesn't quite, this is really for Barry and for Fiona really, it doesn't quite sound like the technology is bankable yet for this. I mean, as you'll know, Barry, a long time ago, the wind farms themselves, wind turbines, they were not bankable. It was project finance if you could get any private finance behind it, which is a more adventurous form of financing until the costs were less prohibitive for the financial markets and for lenders, such that it became a bankable technology. We're talking about sort of very specific subsea cabling here, I think. We're not talking about something that's really an established technology anywhere as yet. So the financing solutions are going to be project finance, long-term financial arrangements for more sort of venture capitalists, I think, if we're talking about that kind of technology offshore. So that's kind of what I'm interested in, the financing, we're a long way on the technological solution, I think, or technology that is bankable. So what are we thinking about on the financing arrangement?
Okay, we've got an awful lot of questions, as always happens, and I know we haven't got much time. So what I'm going to do is ask you to ask really short questions, and I'm going to try and take as many as I can, and then we'll have one more round. Wasn't particularly aimed at you, I promise you. So, gentleman with his hand up there.
Hi, I'm really sorry I can't be short because
you can.
A little bit of context. So, thank you to the panel. My name is Ajay Lawali. I'm the head of supply chain at Renewable UK. I'm also on the executive committee for SME4Labour, and I'm a proud representative of Dillinger West Norwood CLP. I just want to reflect on and agree that many of the points are challenging with regards to commercial, regulatory, and to some degree technical. Just like to respond and say the technology is there. I'm an engineer and I've designed and built some of these systems over the last 15 years. So the technology is there. I think one key point I'd like to add to the discussion is that it's not as if anything with regards to the mesh grid isn't actually happening. So if you're familiar with National Grid, they have a stand here. There's a process called the holistic network design that does speak to that mesh grid. It's just that it's part of a process recognising the limitations of the regulatory system as it currently exists. My question to the group is to recognise the urgency associated with climate change. Now, through the regulatory process, no one's mentioned it once, I don't think. For the regulatory process, we are very proud to say that we've installed 15 gigawatts of offshore wind through radial connections, as we call them.
Come on.
My point is, please acknowledge and want to reflect on the fact that we are trying to drive the car whilst and fix it at the same time.
Brilliant, thank you. Straight in. Let's finish this side first. So, okay. From Ipswich, yeah.
Thanks, Phil Smart, Ipswich Borough Council. I also work for the Rail Freight Group, and we're keen to see the price of electricity come down just to move stuff around on electric railway. But it's not just transport that needs electrifying, there's domestic heating, domestic cooking, steel making, all the other industrial processes at a time when we're weaning ourselves off gas and we've got to replace aging nuclear plant. So I think any solution, whether it's meshed offshore or whatever, this has got to be part of a much broader picture, because as we all know, in this complacent country, the only thing that's going to get the yellow vests rioting out on the street is if the power goes off during Strictly.
Phil. Yep.
Hello. I take all your points. I think it's important to be good faith in terms of the advantages of this. Is it because it's cheaper, that it's quicker, that it's a solution to the emergency that we're facing on climate, which I'm all supportive of? Or is it, I've had a look at your website and the first thing that comes up is stop National Grid needlessly destroying our countryside. Is that the main advantage? Because I think that's a more nebulous aim than the urgency needed for the cheaper energy prices and the climate emergency.
Great, thank you.
What was your name?
Alex.
Thank you. Paul Richards, I'm the chair of Suffolk Coastal Constituency Labour Party, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Jenny Riddell-Carpenter as my member of Parliament. Just very, very quickly, we've talked a lot about strategic thinking and strategic planning. The one thing Labour in so many areas is facing is the complete absence of that over the last 14 years, and this is no exception. No planning whatsoever at strategic level has taken place. We're being pushed around by multinational companies who are developing these things almost out with any sort of planning, even at local level, and we have to do something about that quickly, as a number of other people have said.
Then I think finally at the back, yep.
Hi, Emma from Welland Dolphin Conservation here. It's great to hear so many of the panellists talk about the need to restore nature and make sure we're doing it in collaboration with tackling the climate crisis. I understand the reduced impact in terms of onshore nature and countryside, but I guess alongside a lot of other NGOs, we have some concerns about the impact of offshore energy. And I just wanted to understand if you think that this more kind of coordinated, streamlined approach could actually reduce harms to the marine environment as well, perhaps through reducing the need for cabling, etc. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, loads of different questions there. I'm going to suggest we go this way along the panel, so I'm going to start with Jenny.
Brilliant. I'll stand up again. No, it's all right, thank you. I'd just like to tackle your question. I think maybe I didn't say it explicitly enough, or it wasn't there to be heard. I think my opening remarks, I really did want to make clear that what we're doing as a government, we are the greenest government that has ever been, and I have no doubt that when we look back on this Labour government in the future, when we look back in hindsight, that everything that we've achieved, as I said, through the 5, 10, 15 year and hopefully beyond achievements are not inconsequential, and everything that we're doing now, we are doing at pace, we must do at pace, we must do at scale, because we've left, as Paul rightly said, the Tory government vacated a space of 14 years and refused to make the difficult decisions, and now we're left with a backlog that's meant that the cost of living through energy in particular, any prices in particular, has spiralled, and therefore we're dealing not with just a backlog but a hole that we have to fill whilst also trying to march forward. So I do absolutely recognise, and it's one of the proudest things that I'm already proud of the Labour government, and no doubt will continue to be, is our march forward on green creds and the need to deliver that. I think the but for me is, but putting, and it comes to your point around the cart and the horse, that and to my earlier remarks around the brownfield passport, all these things we're doing are right. It is right that we drive forward at pace and at scale. It's right that we have energy security for our bills. It's right that we transition to green energy completely, and it's right that we tackle net zero. But we must do so in a manner that communities can come on board with, that they can emotionally, physically, financially buy into, and that they can see the benefit for it for them and for generations to come. And at the moment, we can only sell the generations to come bit and the energy prices in 10 years' time bit. The point that we want to make as local leaders is that the buy-in that we can create now, we have to have a better conversation around policy, around planning, in order that we can get that local buy-in. Because it's very easy for somebody in one part of the country to not understand or comprehend why it's a challenge in a local part of the country where that infrastructure is. And it's very easy to throw the word NIMBY around, and it's very easy to say you just don't want it there because it's in your backyard. And the answer is, in reality, it's far more complicated than that. And these concerns that people have are legitimate, and the policy we have as a country should reflect that and be able to give people the buy-in that they need, which is a very long answer. But I hope that makes sense. There was something I wanted to touch on the RSPB comment. It's a really good point, and I didn't mention it, and I regretted not mentioning it. I've met, I was jogged by Barry mentioning Minsmere being my constituency, which is a wonderful location, and I'd really recommend the bird watching there. I went to visit them, and they are concerned about the impact of a lot of the stuff that's happening in the constituency from an infrastructure point of view, but they also rightly raised that the impact that offshore meshed grid would have on wildlife equally. And I think those things need to be considered seriously, because my belief is around the environmental impact, that we can't be just pushing that environmental impact somewhere else without mitigating or seeking to make sure that we're doing the right thing for wildlife and for biodiversity. So it's incredibly complex, and it's often overlooked. We often say it's better over here than it is over there, and actually the answer is it's much more nuanced and incredibly complicated.
Great, thank you. Matthew, about a minute, please, to pick up any of the points. Yes,
I'll try and do this as succinctly as possible, and I'll just pick on a few of the questions. There was a question, will we recognise the climate emergency? Absolutely we do, and I think we've got a Labour government now that is moving forward at a rapid pace. I think huge scale of ambition to get to net zero, to quadruple our offshore wind generation. And I think others said about this broader picture, lack of strategic planning. Under the Tories, it took about 13 years to develop a new offshore wind farm. It went from 2.5 years to approve major national infrastructure to over 4. The delays just grew and grew and grew, and so I absolutely recognise the urgency. To the point about which of these things is it addressing, if it was simply NIMBYism, I don't think many people would have much truck for it. If, however, it's about recognising that there is a way to develop green energy, the way to connect up us, other countries, and to do so in a way that recognises how people feel about their environment, then I think people have it's a much more interesting conversation. So I think I recognise why someone might draw upon multiple reasons to pursue this rather than just one, because as many people have said, my panellists and questions, this has got to be something we can do together in our transition to net zero, where people feel that they are joining us on this journey and that they feel that it's not just, as Jenny says, generations to come, but now we see the benefit and that we feel comfortable with it. So there were 6 questions, and I think I did about 3 there. I'll pass on to Barry.
That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Okay. Amy, you talked about bankability. I think the commercial aspect of this is complex. Coordinating integrated network designs across multiple commercial developments can lead to more complex contract arrangements. And particularly when some stakeholders may not have a clear understanding at the beginning of the benefits of the integrated solution that they're looking at. So I do think there are commercial issues here that are going to pose problems. It's not just, I think, the funding sources. AJ, absolutely right. We are looking to have 50 gigawatt by 2030. Europe is looking to have 300 gigawatt of new offshore electricity by 2050, and that is one of the real drivers of this, how you get a system that can cope with that sort of magnitude of power. But you quite rightly talked about ambition and urgency, and it was a point picked up, the urgency question by Phil and Alex as well, and the need for a holistic solution. 2.2 to 3.4. That is what the IPCC says. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that we're headed for. Not 1.5, but a minimum of 2.2, and the range is up to 3.4 degrees of warming over historic levels 250 years ago, right? So, yes, absolutely urgent that we do this, and that's why it isn't a silver bullet. There is no one silver bullet, it's everything. And that's why it's so important that we have a holistic solution. And Emma, thank you for talking about marine wildlife. I think this conference, most of what I'm speaking on is marine wildlife and oceans and oceanography. But absolutely right. And where these are located and how we fit them in to the natural marine environment is absolutely critical. We have examples of good practice of marine installations and extremely bad practice of marine installations. And this is something that we definitely need to get right.
Great, thank you, Barry. Dan, briefly.
I don't think I've got anything to add. I think those are all great answers.
Fantastic, that gets us back on time almost. Okay. If you stick to almost 45 seconds.
Okay,
yeah.
So financing, we need to be talking about 20 to 30 year payback, not 5 to 10. You need an anticipatory incentive scheme, and the second developer has to share the risk with the first. But above all, you need GBE, because GBE will be the catalyst, will seed the money, and it will then be much easier to attract the investors to come in, not just Ørsted, Vanguard and all of those people, but some British guys too. In terms of the marine damage, a lot of the marine damage is to do with the turbines, and kittiwakes, for example, a big issue with turbines. So whether you go for an offshore grid or not, you've also got some problems with the turbines that need to be considered. But Belgium has done a study recently reported on marine damage showing how their subsea cables are buried so deep that they're minimising the damage. Regarding our website, we're in the process of if you like, redoing it, because the hierarchy of information is faster, cheaper, and then minimising societal and environmental impacts. And it's in that order. But this is really urgent, because at the moment we have HND criteria that people talk about, but they're not being used, they're not being implemented. I can say that from experience. And I just want you to know, as a last word, that a Scottish power engineer at a development consent order examination, when the inspector said, how do you choose a site for your hubs? and she said, well, candidly, we draw a straight line from the wind farm to the closest place on land and drop our boxes. That's what we do, okay? And that's no longer good enough. We have got to do better than that.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. So we've had planning, security, commerciality, botched Brexit. There's an awful lot clearly in a new Labour government's inbox. So thank you so much to everyone for coming along today. Thank you to our panellists, and thank you to SME4Labour for organising it. Please look at the other events that SME4Labour are also organising, and sign up to their mailing list as well. So thanks ever so much, everyone who came along. Well done. 2 minutes.